The old Zephyrian veteran sat in the corner of the academy bar, his forearms wrapped around a drink that had long gone cold. The young cadets from different worlds gathered around him, their eyes wide with curiosity. Kethvar's chitinous plating bore the scars of a dozen battles, but tonight he seemed older than his years. "You want to know about the humans?" he asked, his voice like grinding stone. "Fine, but don't expect heroic tales. What I'll tell you will keep you awake at night." He took a long sip and stared into the distance. My first encounter with humans was at Kepler Station. We thought we knew everything about warfare. Every species in the galaxy followed the same basic rules. Soldiers fight, medics heal, civilians hide. Simple, clean, logical. The young aliens leaned forward as Kethvar's eyes grew distant. The station was a trading post on the edge of human space. Nothing special. Our fleet had surrounded it completely. Standard boarding action. We expected them to surrender within hours. He paused, remembering. The humans had maybe 200 defenders against our 1,000. The math was simple. They should have given up. Instead, they fought like cornered beasts. But that wasn't the strange part. A young Altarian cadet raised her hand. "What was strange, sir?" Kethvar's mandibles clicked together slowly. "They're medics." He set down his drink and used his four hands to gesture as he spoke. In civilized warfare, medics stay behind cover. They treat the wounded when it's safe. They wear special markings so both sides know not to target them. Everyone understands this. Everyone except humans. The cadets exchanged glances. I was part of the third wave boarding party. We had pushed deep into the station's corridors. The fighting was heavy, but we were winning. Then I saw something that made no sense. Kethvar's voice dropped to a whisper. A human medic ran past me, not away from the fighting, but toward it. She had the Red Cross symbol on her uniform. Her hands carried medical supplies, not weapons, and she was running straight into crossfire to reach a wounded soldier. He shook his head slowly. At first, I thought she was confused, maybe scared, but then I watched her work. Plasma bolts were flying everywhere. My own squad was taking cover behind steel barriers, and this small human female was kneeling in the open, treating wounds. The bar had grown quiet. Even other veterans at nearby tables were listening now. The wounded soldier wasn't even human. It was Krex from my unit. The medic didn't care. She started working on his injuries while bullets and energy blasts flew overhead. I couldn't understand it. Kethvar picked up his drink again but didn't take a sip. I called out to her, told her to get to safety. She looked at me for a moment. Her eyes were scared, yes, but also determined. She said something I'll never forget. He cleared his throat and spoke in a higher voice, imitating the human medic. "He's hurt. That's all that matters." The silence stretched on. Then she went back to treating Krex. A plasma bolt hit the wall right next to her head. She didn't even flinch, just kept working. Applied pressure bandages, gave him pain medicine, checked his vital signs, all while the battle raged around her. A young Draconian cadet spoke up. "What happened to her?" Kethvar's expression darkened. "I'm getting to that." He took a long drink before continuing. The fighting moved deeper into the station. We thought we had control of that section, but humans don't fight like other species. They kept coming back. Small groups would appear from ventilation shafts or maintenance tunnels, hit-and-run attacks. The veteran's claws tapped against his glass. During one of these attacks, an explosive device went off near our position. The blast threw me against a wall. When the smoke cleared, I was bleeding from several wounds. Krex was unconscious again. 2 of my squad mates were badly hurt. He paused, looking at each cadet in turn. Then I heard footsteps, heavy boots on metal floor. I expected human soldiers coming to finish us off. Instead, the same medic appeared around the corner. The cadets gasped. She saw us lying there, wounded enemies. She could have walked away, could have called for human soldiers to capture us. Instead, she dropped her medical bag and started working. Kethvar's voice became softer. She treated my wounds first. I was so shocked I couldn't move. Here was this human, this enemy, cleaning my cuts and applying bandages. I asked her why. She said, "You're hurt." "That's enough reason." He shook his head in wonder. Then she moved to my squad mates. One had a piece of metal in his chest, dangerous to remove without proper surgery. She stabilized him, gave him medicine for the pain, all while human and alien forces were fighting just corridors away. The bar was completely silent now. She worked on Krex next. His earlier wounds had reopened from the explosion. She was gentle, careful. Talked to him softly even though he was unconscious. Like he was her own squad mate instead of an enemy. Kethvar's voice began to shake slightly. That's when the second explosion happened. The cadets leaned forward. Human reinforcements had arrived. They were pushing back our forces with some kind of new weapon. The entire station shook. Lights went out. Emergency power kicked in with a red glow. He took a shaky breath. A support beam came loose above us. I saw it falling toward where the medic was working on Krex. She saw it too. Had time to jump away. Could have saved herself easily. The veteran's 4 hands gripped his glass tightly. Instead, she threw herself over Krex, covered his body with her own. The beam hit her instead. Several cadets made small sounds of shock. I crawled over to them. She was badly hurt. Internal injuries. But the first thing she asked was if Krex was okay. Not about her own wounds. Not about her pain. About the enemy soldier she had just saved. Kethvar's voice was barely audible now. I told her Krex was fine. She smiled. Then she reached into her medical bag with trembling hands, pulled out more bandages and medicine, tried to give them to me, said there might be other wounded who needed help. He set down his glass and looked directly at the young cadets. She died 20 minutes later, never stopped trying to help others, even as her own life slipped away. The silence in the bar was complete. That's when I understood something terrible about humans, something that changed how I fought for the rest of the war. They don't just protect their own people. They can't help themselves. They see suffering and they act. Doesn't matter if you're friend or enemy. Doesn't matter if it puts them in danger. Kethvar stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. You want to know what makes humans terrifying? It's not their weapons or their tactics. It's their medics. People who will die to save you, even while you're trying to kill them. How do you fight an enemy like that? How do you plan for soldiers who care more about healing than winning? He picked up his coat and headed for the door. That medic's name was Chen Li Ming. I learned it later from captured records. She was 23 years old, had a family back on Earth, and she died saving the life of an alien soldier who had been trying to kill her friends just hours before. The veteran paused at the door and looked back at the stunned cadets. Sleep well tonight, younglings. Tomorrow I'll tell you about what happened when we cut the power to their positions, when we thought darkness would give us the advantage. His laugh was bitter as he walked into the night. We were so very wrong. The next evening, Kethvar returned to the academy bar. Word had spread about his stories and more cadets had gathered. Some were older students, others barely out of basic training. All watched him with nervous respect. The old veteran ordered the same drink and settled into his usual corner. His scarred face looked tired in the dim light. You came back, he said simply. Good. Maybe you'll learn something that keeps you alive. A Centaurian cadet raised his hand. Sir, yesterday you said the humans were scary because of their medics. But medics don't fight. Kethvar's laugh was short and harsh. That's what we thought too. We decided to make the humans fight on our terms, in conditions where their compassion wouldn't matter. He took a drink and stared at the wall. Proxima Base was built into an asteroid, miles of tunnels carved deep into solid rock. The humans had taken control of the upper levels, but we held everything below ground. The veteran's 4 hands moved as he described the layout. The tunnel system was perfect for us. We had advanced night vision equipment, heat sensors, motion detectors. The humans had portable lights and basic gear. When they came down into our territory, we could see them from hundreds of meters away. He paused, remembering. Our strategy was simple. Cut the main power to the upper levels. Force the humans down into the tunnels where we had every advantage. Pick them off in the darkness like hunting prey. A young Zephyrian cadet spoke up. That sounds like good tactics, sir. It was good tactics, Kethvar agreed. For the first 6 hours. His expression grew troubled. The power went out at Oro 300 station time. We waited in our positions watching our sensors. Sure enough, the humans started moving down into the tunnel system, small groups moving carefully with flashlights. The veteran's claws clicked against his glass. We let the first teams get deep into the tunnels. Then we attacked. Quick silent strikes. Take out their lights first, then the soldiers. It worked perfectly. He drank slowly before continuing. By Euro 900, we had eliminated 3 human squads. Our equipment showed no more movement in the tunnels. We thought we had won. The humans would have to come down eventually or starve in the upper levels. Kethvar's voice grew quieter. That's when we started hearing the singing. The cadets exchanged confused glances. At first, it was very soft, coming from somewhere deep in the tunnel system. Human voices, but we couldn't tell where from. The acoustics in those tunnels made sounds bounce everywhere. He shook his head slowly. The songs were strange, not military marching songs or war chants. They sounded like lullabies, soft melodies that parents might sing to children. A draconian cadet frowned. Lullabies? In a war zone? That's what we thought. Some kind of psychological warfare, trying to make us nervous or confused. We ignored it and continued our patrols. Kethvar's expression darkened. Then Sergeant Vex didn't report in. The bar grew quiet. Vex was patrolling Tunnel Section 7. Experienced soldier, good equipment, constant radio contact. At 1100 hours, his communications went silent. No distress call, no sounds of fighting, just nothing. The veteran took a long drink. We sent a team to investigate. Found his gear scattered in the tunnel. Night vision goggles smashed, weapon missing, radio destroyed. But no body, no blood, no signs of struggle. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably. 2 hours later, Private Kell vanished from Tunnel Section 12. Same thing. Equipment destroyed, soldier gone, like ghosts had taken them. Kethvar's 4 hands gestured in the air. We started moving in larger groups, stayed together, watched each other's backs, but the tunnels were confusing. Easy to get separated, and the singing continued. He paused, listening to something only he could hear. The songs were getting closer, still soft, still gentle, but now we could hear there were multiple voices. Sometimes they would sing in harmony. Beautiful, actually, which made it more terrifying. A young Altarian cadet whispered, "What were they singing?" I learned later they were old Earth songs. Brahms' lullaby, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Songs that human parents sang to help their children sleep. The veteran's voice became strained. By 1500 hours, we had lost 8 soldiers, always the same way. Equipment destroyed, person missing. Our commanders decided to use thermal imaging to track the humans. He laughed bitterly. The thermal scans showed nothing. The tunnels were cold stone and the humans weren't giving off heat signatures. Either they had some kind of advanced stealth technology or what? A cadet asked. Or they weren't where we expected them to be. Kethvar set down his glass and leaned forward. At 1800 hours, I was part of a patrol in the main tunnel junction. 6 soldiers, full equipment, maximum alert. We had motion sensors covering every approach. His voice dropped to a whisper. The singing started again, very close this time, right behind us. We spun around, weapons ready. The tunnel was empty, but the song continued. The cadets were barely breathing. Then we realized the sound was coming from above us. Several aliens gasped. The humans were in the air vents, crawling through spaces barely big enough for their bodies, moving through the station's ventilation system like it was their own highway. Kethvar's eyes were distant, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they were hunting us in complete darkness. Our night vision showed the vents as solid black. Even thermal imaging couldn't penetrate that far. But somehow they knew exactly where we were. He took a shaky breath. One of them dropped down right into our group. No sound, no warning. Just a human soldier appearing in the middle of us like magic. The veteran's hands trembled slightly. In the few seconds before we could react, I saw his face in the light of our equipment. He looked terrified, scared out of his mind, but he was there anyway, fighting in conditions that should have been impossible. What happened? A cadet asked. He disabled 3 of us before we could even raise our weapons. Not killed, disabled. Broken bones, unconsciousness, but no deaths. Then he vanished back into the vents. Kethvar shook his head in disbelief. That's when I understood something horrifying about humans. They don't need technology to hunt in the dark. They adapt. They learn. They use senses we barely understand. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the academy grounds. The remaining human defenders had been listening to us for hours, learning our patrol routes, our communication patterns, our weaknesses. They used the ventilation system like a 3-dimensional map. The veteran turned back to the cadets. And the singing? That was their way of staying calm. Human soldiers singing gentle songs to each other while they crawled through dark, cramped spaces to hunt enemies with superior equipment. He returned to his seat. By 2000 hours, we had pulled back to our main command post, locked the entrances, set up overlapping fields of fire. We thought we were safe. Kethvar's laugh was hollow. The singing came from inside our own base. The bar was completely silent. They had been moving through the vents for hours, mapping our positions, waiting for the right moment. When they attacked, it was perfectly coordinated. Lights went out, soldiers appeared from impossible directions, and we were defeated in our own stronghold. He finished his drink in one gulp. The human commander found me after the fighting ended, asked if I was hurt. When I said no, he smiled and said, "Good. War is scary enough without fighting in the dark." The veteran looked around at the young faces watching him. That human soldier was afraid of the dark just like anyone else. But he went into it anyway. He and his squad mates sang lullabies to comfort each other while they did the impossible. Kethvar gathered his coat. "Tomorrow night, I'll tell you about the evacuation of Titan's Rest, about what happens when you threaten civilian lives in front of human soldiers." He paused at the door. "Bring more friends. They'll want to hear this story. It's about the day we learned that cornering humans doesn't make them surrender." His voice carried across the silent bar. "It makes them do mathematics that shouldn't be possible." The third night brought even more cadets to the academy bar. News of HFY Stories had spread throughout the military school. Young officers from a dozen different species crowded around tables, all waiting to hear what the old veteran would say next. Kethvar looked around at the packed room and sighed. His scarred face showed the weight of memories he carried. "So many young faces," he said quietly. "I hope some of you are smart, enough to learn from my mistakes." He ordered his usual drink and waited for the room to settle. Tonight's story is about Titan's Rest, a mining colony on the edge of the Vega system. Population of about 50,000. Mostly families. Miners, engineers, teachers, doctors. People trying to build a life on a harsh world. The veteran's 4 hands wrapped around his glass. The planet had strategic importance because of its rare metal deposits. Both sides wanted control. The problem was the civilians caught in the middle. A Centaurian cadet raised her hand. "Sir, what happened to the colonists?" Kethvar's expression grew dark. "That's what this story is about." He took a drink and continued. "Our fleet had surrounded the planet. Standard siege tactics. Cut off supply lines, establish orbital bombardment positions, demand surrender. The human garrison had maybe 3,000 soldiers defending the entire world. The veteran's claws tapped against the table. The math was simple. We had 20 ships in orbit and 15,000 ground troops. The humans couldn't win a direct fight, so we offered them a deal." He paused, looking around the room. "Surrender the military facilities and we would allow safe passage for all civilians. Standard wartime protocol." Everyone understood this was the logical choice. A young draconian spoke up. "Did they accept?" The human commander asked for 12 hours to consider our terms. We agreed. Seemed reasonable. Kethvar's voice grew quieter. During those 12 hours, the humans did something we didn't expect. They started evacuating civilians anyway. Several cadets frowned in confusion. "I don't understand, sir," an Altarian said. "If they were going to surrender, why evacuate?" The veteran's laugh was bitter. "Because they weren't planning to surrender. They were planning to save everyone and then fight us anyway." He set down his glass and leaned forward. The evacuation started at dawn. Transport ships, cargo haulers, even mining equipment converted to carry people. Anything that could fly was pressed into service. Kethvar's eyes grew distant. At first we thought it was just moving civilians to safety while they prepared to surrender. But then our sensors showed human ships trying to run our blockade. He shook his head slowly. The first transport got through because we weren't expecting it. A cargo hauler full of families, flying straight at our destroyer line. They used the planet's magnetic field to mask their approach. The cadets leaned forward, listening intently. Our commander ordered the second transport stopped. Warning shots first, then targeting engines if they didn't turn back. Standard procedure. Kethvar's voice became strained. The transport ship was piloted by a human named Rodriguez. Single-person crew, 200 civilians aboard. When we fired warning shots, he transmitted a message. The veteran cleared his throat and spoke in a higher voice. "I've got kids on this ship. I'm getting them to safety. You'll have to kill me to stop me." The room was completely silent, so we disabled his engines. The ship went into a slow spin, losing altitude. Should have been the end of it. Instead, Rodriguez used the ship's emergency thrusters to stabilize the descent and made a controlled crash landing back at the spaceport. Kethvar shook his head in disbelief. Within an hour, he was back in another ship with the same 200 civilians, flying the same route, When we hailed him, he gave the same message. A cadet whispered, "What did you do?" "We disabled that ship too." "And the next one?" "And the one after that." Rodriguez kept coming back. "Different ship, same people, same route." The veteran's 4 hands gestured helplessly. After the 6th attempt, our commander realized something terrible. The humans weren't going to stop. They would rather die trying than abandon those civilians. He took a long drink before continuing. That's when we learned about the other evacuation routes. Several aliens gasped. While Rodriguez was keeping our attention with his repeated runs, other human pilots were finding different ways off the planet. Some flew at treetop level to avoid our sensors. Others used the planet's moon for cover. Kethvar's voice grew admiring despite himself. One pilot named Chen took her transport ship into the planet's upper atmosphere and cut all power. Fell like a rock for 30,000 feet before restarting the engines. Flew right past our patrol ships while they were looking for active engine signatures. He paused, remembering. Another pilot, Jackson, strapped emergency rockets to a mining platform. Turned industrial equipment into a makeshift spacecraft. It shouldn't have worked. The thing had no business flying. But somehow he got 40 families to safety. The veteran looked around at the stunned faces. By the end of the 2nd day, we had counted 67 evacuation attempts. Some succeeded, some failed, but they kept coming. The humans had turned saving civilians into a science. A young Zephyrian cadet spoke up. "How many people did they save?" Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. "All of them." The bar erupted in confused murmurs. "Impossible," someone called out. "You said 50,000 people." 50,237, the veteran corrected, including pets. The humans counted everything. He stood up and walked to the window. It took them 4 days. 4 days of impossible flights, crashed ships, and pilots who refused to quit. Our fleet shot down 32 transports. Every time, the human pilots managed controlled crashes with minimal casualties. Kethvar turned back to the cadets. The pilot, Rodriguez, he made 17 trips through orbital bombardment. His ship was held together with metal tape and emergency welds by the end. It should have exploded on the 3rd run. The veteran's voice became softer. On his final trip, his engines finally gave out halfway to the jump point. Dead in space, no power, life support failing. That should have been the end. He paused dramatically. Instead, 3 other human ships came back for him, turned around in the middle of their own escapes to rescue a pilot and his passengers. The cadet stared in amazement. One of those rescue ships was piloted by Chen. She had already made 12 safe runs and could have escaped clean. Instead, she came back because, quote, "Nobody gets left behind." Kethvar returned to his seat. When the evacuation was complete, the human commander finally answered our surrender demand. Do you know what he said? The room was breathless with anticipation. "Thank you for waiting. Now we can fight properly." Several cadets made sounds of disbelief. 3,000 human soldiers against our entire invasion force. They had no civilians to protect anymore, so they could focus completely on combat. The veteran's laugh was hollow. The battle that followed lasted 8 days. The humans turned that planet into a fortress. Every building, every tunnel, every piece of high ground became a weapon. He took a shaky breath. We won eventually, but at such a cost that our own command questioned whether the victory was worth it. 70% casualties among our ground forces. Kethvar looked directly at the young officers. Here's what you need to understand about humans. They didn't fight that hard because they were soldiers. They fought that hard because they were parents, friends, protectors. He finished his drink. Every human on that planet knew someone who had been evacuated. They were fighting for specific faces, specific names. Rodriguez's daughter, Chen's husband, Jackson's elderly mother. The veteran gathered his coat. The mathematics were impossible. 50,000 people evacuated through a military blockade by 3,000 soldiers, with limited resources. But humans don't care about mathematics when lives are at stake. He paused at the door. Tomorrow night, I'll tell you about the Battle of Iron Gates, about what happens when you corner human. Soldiers with nowhere to run. His voice carried a warning. About the day we learned that humans have a protocol for when they're going to die, and why that protocol is the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. The 4th night brought commanders and senior officers to the Academy bar alongside the cadets. Word of Kethvar's stories had reached the highest levels of the military academy. The old veteran found himself facing an audience that included his former superiors. He looked around the crowded room with tired eyes. "I see some familiar faces tonight," he said quietly. "Officers who were there, who know these stories are true." Admiral Vex 9, a distinguished Altarian, nodded grimly from the back of the room. Kethvar ordered his drink and waited for silence. The Battle of Iron Gates was supposed to be our final victory, the last human stronghold in the sector. After that, the war would be over. He took a sip and stared at the table. The fortress was built into a mountain range on Kepler 442b, natural barriers on 3 sides, open ground on the 4th, perfect defensive position for the humans. The veteran's 4 hands moved as he described the battlefield. Our strategy was simple: surround the fortress completely, cut off all supply lines, wait for them to run out of food and ammunition, force them to surrender. A young cadet raised his hand. "How many humans were defending the fortress, sir?" 800 soldiers, against our 20,000 ground troops and orbital support. Several officers whistled in appreciation of the odds. The siege lasted 3 weeks. No supplies getting in, no communications getting out. We monitored their positions constantly, watched their ammunition run low, their food supplies dwindle. Kethvar's expression grew troubled. By the end of the 3rd week, our intelligence suggested they had less than a day's worth of rations left. Maybe enough ammunition for one more battle. He paused, remembering. That's when our commander decided to offer terms. One final chance for the humans to surrender with honor before we overwhelmed them. The veteran looked around the room. The human response came back within an hour. Their commander, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, agreed to meet under a flag of truce. Admiral Vex 9 leaned forward, clearly remembering this moment. "I was there for that meeting," Kethvar continued. Mitchell looked exactly like you'd expect from a soldier under siege. Tired, thin, wearing a uniform that had seen too much combat. He took a long drink. Our commander offered generous terms. Surrender the fortress and all personnel would be treated according to the laws of war. Medical care for the wounded, prisoner exchanges after the conflict ended. The room was completely silent. Mitchell listened politely. Then she asked one question that changed everything. Kethvar's voice became quieter. She said, "What guarantee do we have that you'll honor those terms with other human colonies?" Several cadets frowned in confusion. Our commander was honest. He said we couldn't guarantee anything. War was war. The veteran set down his glass. That's when Mitchell smiled. Not a happy smile, a sad one. She said, "Then we'll have to send a different message." Admiral Vex 9 nodded grimly. She stood up to leave, but our commander stopped her, asked what she meant by different message. Kethvar's voice became strained. Mitchell turned back and said 3 words that still give me nightmares. "Last stand protocol." The room erupted in nervous murmurs from those who had heard the term before. None of us knew what that meant. Some kind of final battle plan, we assumed. Desperate tactics from a cornered enemy. The veteran's 4 hands gripped his glass tightly. The attack began at dawn the next day. Standard assault pattern. Infantry. Advance with air support. Artillery to soften their positions first. He paused, his expression growing distant. The first thing we noticed was the silence. No return fire from the fortress. No movement on the walls. We thought maybe they had abandoned their positions. A young Draconian cadet spoke up. Had they? No. They were waiting. Kithvar took a shaky breath. Our first wave reached the outer walls without resistance, started setting charges to breach the gates. That's when the humans opened fire. His voice dropped to a whisper. But it wasn't normal defensive fire. Every shot was perfectly placed. Every movement coordinated, like they had been planning this exact battle for years. The veteran looked around at the faces watching him. In the first 10 minutes, we lost 300 soldiers, not to superior weapons or better positions, to impossible accuracy and tactical perfection. He shook his head slowly. Then we realized what last stand protocol meant. The humans weren't trying to win. They weren't trying to escape. They were trying to make us pay the highest possible price for victory. Several officers made sounds of understanding. Every human soldier knew they were going to die. So they had planned the perfect battle. Not to save themselves, but to make sure their deaths counted for something. Kethvar's voice became hollow. A wounded human soldier would drag himself to a better firing position before collapsing. Medics would treat injuries just long enough for the soldier to keep fighting. Engineers would repair weapons with their dying breaths. The bar was completely silent now. I saw a human sergeant with both legs blown off continue operating heavy artillery. His squad mates propped him up against the gun mount and fed him ammunition. He kept firing until he bled out. The veteran's hands trembled. Another soldier had taken shrapnel through her chest. Should have been fatal within minutes. Instead, she used her medical training to keep herself alive just long enough to call in coordinates for orbital bombardment on our positions. Admiral Vex 9 spoke from the back of the room. "Tell them about the radio intercepts." Kethvar nodded grimly. Our communications team was monitoring human radio traffic, expecting to hear panic, confusion, desperation. Instead, we heard something much worse. He cleared his throat. The humans were saying goodbye. Several cadets gasped. Not dramatic last words or heroic speeches, simple personal messages. "Tell my wife I love her. Make sure my son knows I'm proud of him. Tell my brother the joke I was saving for his birthday." The veteran's voice cracked. They recorded hundreds of these messages during the battle. Personal notes to family members they would never see again. And between each message they went back to fighting with impossible determination. He took a long drink to steady himself. The battle lasted 18 hours. Every meter of ground cost us dozens of soldiers. The humans never retreated, never surrendered, never stopped fighting. Kethvar looked directly at the young cadets. By the end, we had taken the fortress, but at what cost? We lost 8,000 soldiers, nearly half our assault force, against 800 humans who knew they were going to die. The room was breathless with horror. When the fighting finally ended, we found something in the Fortress Command Center that explained everything. He paused dramatically. A detailed tactical manual. Title page read, "Last Stand Protocol, How to Make Your Death Matter." Several officers shifted uncomfortably. The manual was hundreds of pages long. Detailed plans for how to inflict maximum casualties while defending a hopeless position. Mathematical calculations for ammunition conservation, tactical positioning, psychological warfare. Kethvar's voice became admiring despite himself. The humans had studied their own deaths like a science, figured out how to make 800 soldiers fight like 8,000. He stood up slowly, but the worst part wasn't the tactical brilliance. It was the personal notes written in the margins. The veteran's voice became softer. Things like, "Remember Jenny's birthday is next week," written next to weapons maintenance schedules. "Tell Dad his fishing stories weren't boring," next to casualty estimates. He walked to the window. The humans turned their final battle into love letters. They fought so hard because they were saying goodbye to everyone they cared about. Admiral Vex 9 stood up from the back. That battle changed our entire war strategy. We realized that cornering humans doesn't lead to surrender. It leads to last stand protocol. Kethvar nodded. After Iron Gates, we never tried to completely surround human positions again. Always left them an escape route. Not out of mercy, but out of fear. He returned to his seat and finished his drink. "Tomorrow night I'll tell you the final story. About what happened after the war ended. About the day we learned the most terrifying thing about humans." His voice carried across the silent room. "About the day we discovered that everything they did in war, all the impossible rescues, the hopeless battles, the last stand protocols, came from a species that actually hates fighting." The veteran gathered his coat. "Come back tomorrow if you want to understand why the galaxy will never fight humans again. Why we signed treaties that no one has ever broken." He paused at the door. "Because the most dangerous enemy isn't one who wants to kill you. It's one who doesn't want to, but will anyway." The final night brought the largest crowd yet to the Academy bar. Cadets, officers, and even civilian faculty had come to hear the conclusion of Kethvar's tales. The old veteran looked around the packed room with something approaching sadness. 5 nights of stories, he said quietly. 5 nights of trying to explain something that shouldn't be possible. He ordered his drink and waited for the room to settle. Tonight's story is the hardest one to tell. Not because it's violent or tragic, but because it's about the moment I understood what humans really are. The veteran's scarred face showed deep weariness. The war was over. We had won, technically. Human forces had been defeated across the sector. Their colonies occupied, their fleets destroyed or scattered. He took a sip and stared into his glass. I was part of the occupation force on Kepler Prime, the human capital world in this region. 3 billion people, mostly civilians. The largest surrender in galactic history. A young Altarian cadet raised her hand. What were your orders, sir? Standard occupation protocol. Secure government facilities. Disarm military units, establish administrative control. Keep the peace while politicians decided the planet's future. Kethvar's 4 hands wrapped around his glass. I expected the humans to be bitter. Defeated people usually are. Angry at their conquerors, resentful of occupation forces. Ready to cause trouble whenever possible. He paused, looking confused even decades later. Instead, the first thing that happened was a human delegation requesting a meeting with our commanding officers. Room leaned forward with interest. Delegation was led by Dr. Sarah Chen. Not the medic from my first story, a different Chen. She was the planet's chief medical officer. The veteran's voice became softer. She came to offer assistance. Several cadets frowned in confusion. I don't understand. Sir, a Draconian said. Assistance with what? With treating our wounded? The bar fell silent. Dr. Chen had reviewed casualty reports from the final battles. She knew we had thousands of injured soldiers scattered across multiple worlds. She offered to provide medical supplies, hospital space, and human doctors to help treat them. Kethvar shook his head slowly. Our commander thought it was some kind of trick. Why would a defeated enemy offer to help heal the soldiers who had conquered them? He took a long drink. Dr. Chen's answer was simple. Because they're hurt and we can help. The veteran looked around at the stunned faces. She wasn't talking about human wounded. We had been treating those according to standard protocols. She was talking about our wounded, alien soldiers who had been fighting to destroy her world. A young Zephyrian cadet whispered, What did your commander say? He said no, obviously. We had our own medical corps, our own supplies. We didn't need help from conquered enemies. Kethvar's expression grew troubled, but Dr. Chen kept coming back, every day for a week. Always with the same offer, always with the same explanation. He cleared his throat and spoke in a higher voice. You have soldiers dying in field hospitals because you don't have enough surgeons. We have surgeons sitting idle because the fighting is over. This isn't about politics. It's about saving lives. The veteran set down his glass. On the 8th day, one of our forward medical stations sent a distress call. Mass casualty event from a transport crash. More wounded than they could handle. His voice became strained. Dr. Chen heard the transmission, showed up at the crash site with a full medical team and supply trucks. Didn't ask permission, didn't wait for orders. Just started treating our wounded. The room was completely silent. I was at that crash site. Saw human doctors working on alien soldiers who had been their enemies just days before. Saw them using their own medical supplies to save lives. Kethvar's voice cracked slightly. One of the wounded was my squad mate from Kepler Station. The same Krex who had been treated by the human medic in my first story. He was badly injured, needed surgery that our field doctors couldn't perform. He paused, remembering. Dr. Chen spent 6 hours in surgery saving his life. Used expensive human medical equipment that we could never have replaced if something went wrong. The veteran looked directly at the cadets. When Krex woke up, the first thing he saw was Dr. Chen checking his vital signs. She smiled and said, Welcome back. You gave us quite a scare. Several aliens made sounds of amazement. Krex asked her why. Why save the life of an enemy soldier? Her answer was exactly what you'd expect from a human. Kethvar's voice became softer. You're not my enemy anymore. You're my patient. He stood up and walked to the window. That was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, human civilians started approaching our occupation forces with offers of help. The veteran turned back to the room. Engineers wanted to repair our damaged vehicles. Teachers offered to help translate documents. Farmers brought food for our soldiers who were stationed far from supply lines. Admiral Vex 9, who had been listening from the back, nodded slowly. I remember getting reports about this. Thought it was organized resistance activity. That's what we all thought, Kethvar agreed. Some kind of sophisticated psychological warfare. Make the occupying forces comfortable, then strike when we least expected it. He returned to his seat. So we investigated. Deep background checks on every human who offered assistance. Looking for connections to resistance groups, hidden weapons, secret communication networks. The veteran's laugh was hollow. We found nothing. No hidden agendas, no secret plans. The humans were helping us because they saw people who needed help. He took a shaky breath. That's when I realized something that changed my understanding of the entire war. The room held its breath. Every story I've told you over the past 4 nights. The medics, the tunnel fighters, the evacuation pilots, the last stand protocol. All of it came from the same source. Kethvar looked around at the faces watching him. Love. The word hung in the air. Humans don't fight because they enjoy violence. They fight because they love something enough to protect it, and when the fighting is over, that love doesn't disappear. His voice became stronger. The medic who died saving Krex wasn't motivated by military duty. She was motivated by the same thing that made Dr. Chen operate on him after the war. Compassion for suffering. The veteran's 4 hands gestured as he spoke. The pilots who risked everything to evacuate Titan's Rest weren't following orders. They were protecting families because they understood what families meant. He paused, looking directly at Admiral Vex 9. The soldiers who died at Iron Gates weren't trying to kill us. They were trying to send a message that some things are worth dying for. The room was completely silent. And when the war ended, when they had lost everything, their first instinct wasn't revenge. It was to help heal the wounds that war had created. Kethvar finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. 3 months after the occupation began, our own medical corps started requesting human assistance, not because they had to, but because human doctors were better at certain procedures. He smiled sadly. 6 months later, human and alien medical teams were working together so seamlessly that you couldn't tell who had been enemies. The veteran stood up slowly. A year later, when we were ordered to withdraw and return the planet to human control, half our soldiers didn't want to leave. Several cadets gasped, not because they liked ruling over humans, but because they had made friends. Real friendships with people who had every reason to hate them. Kethvar gathered his coat. The day we left Kepler Prime, Dr. Chen was at the spaceport, not to celebrate our departure, but to say goodbye. She hugged our commanding officer and made him promise to stay in touch. His voice became very quiet. She also gave him a message for the Galactic Military Command. A simple request. The veteran paused at the door. She said, "Tell them we're ready to help again if anyone gets hurt. War or peace doesn't matter. Just let us know." He looked back at the crowd one final time. That's why we never fight humans anymore. Not because we're afraid of their weapons or their tactics. We're afraid of their mercy. Kethvar's voice carried across the silent room. Because any species that can show compassion to their defeated enemies is capable of anything. Any species that fights wars they hate in order to protect what they love is too dangerous to oppose. He opened the door to leave. Sleep well, younglings. And remember, the most terrifying thing in the galaxy isn't a human who wants to kill you. His final words echoed through the bar. It's a human who doesn't want to, but will do it anyway to protect someone else. The door closed behind him, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. Outside, Kethvar looked up at the stars and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. Thank the void we're allies now.